Okay, so there's a lot of conversation about like Nijisanji and the practical effects of all the EN related community backlash. And I think major questions that I had, and probably like a lot of people tend to will have, um, will like how much revenue loss is negligible to any color? How much revenue does EN sort of contribute to any color? And like, I guess the big one is like how much revenue would a single popular VTuber represent to a company like any color, right? Um, so I feel like I kind of did the logical thing here, and I just like pulled up the last financial report from December of last year. Uh, and I really think that like two slides in this report answer like a lot of the preliminary questions. Um, so like the first one is like sort of like how much revenue does Ian contribute, right? I think this is answered fairly well here, right? I mean, we can like kind of clearly see it's broken up between Japan and English, and we can, as we say, as I said, we can fairly see that it's about 25% of the revenue generation, right? So sure, you could say in a like a worst case scenario, Ninja Sanji has to, or any color has to eventually shut down Ninja Sanji EN. Okay, that's a 25% revenue loss. There's no world in which that's negligible, right? Um, is that incredibly likely to happen? Right? I think that would require some fairly special circumstances to be so, but that is a sort of worst case scenario, 25%, right? The second slide really goes into like sort of like how much revenue would a single popular VTuber represent, right? Um, since this sort of shows right here, boom, the top 25 earners in Nijisanji earn about 50% of the revenue, right? Um, we can say that each of these earners are contributing on average 2% of the revenue. I understand that there's going to be a variance within, right? But we can sort of an average statement, right? If the EN branch in itself is similarly top heavy to what we're seeing here, right? Seeing the same trends where, most of the earnings are coming from fewer individuals. I don't think it would at all be unreasonable to assume that the top Ninja EN earners are within, let's say, the top 25 overall VTubers, right? Um, so we're probably looking at a minimum of 2% loss if we were to lose a popular VTuber, right? Say we lose two very popular VTubers, I think we're looking at minimum a loss of sort of 4 to 5% revenue generation potential, right? Um, this could, in some way, be the basis for any color's like rationale for their shareholder, like a negligible statement. Um, the loss of sort of a single VTuber, right? And this was a statement about a single VTuber. If I'm being sort of like incredibly charitable to any color in my sort of assessment, right? The loss of a single VTuber represents about like say like a 2 to 3% loss in revenue, right? This very likely doesn't express itself. Let's be fair in like the upcoming quarter 3 report, and they probably expect a greater than a greater than 2 to 3% revenue growth, in the upcoming say quarter 3, quarter 4, right? So it's like kind of a fair thing. You could say that they would be able to cover this loss by their numbers, right? It would just sort of slightly slow growth than say incur loss, right? Or incur contraction, right? So this of course is, again, as I was saying, being very charitable about like how they release a statement. It's obviously a terrible PR statement, right? And it also goes to say that like there is knock-on effects to this, right? If you were to say there's a coordinated, prolonged sort of any color boycott from EN fans, this revenue loss can go higher. I mean, essentially, we're looking at upwards of 25%, right? I mean, something that is properly coordinated has knock on effects because shared viewership amongst EN VTubers and so on and so forth, right? Um, you could be seeing upwards of 10% revenue generation potential loss, right? However we want to put it like that, right? Um, this is sort of worst case scenario for territory for the company. Um, maybe you see half your EN revenue lost over the upcoming quarters. It is a real situation if this is prolonged.